Hi, I'm montze.t, and this is my response for CRE number 6. So, what's my grieving process? I personally think that my way of grieving is more focused on distraction based. And I think that this grieving process comes from just the way that I was raised, being raised with a family of 6 and then 3 younger brothers. My dad just raised me on a more like masculine, like stereotype way. So I was just brought up with like the reasoning that like crying is bad, and like if you don't really have a need, or not need, but like I guess quote unquote reason to cry, but nothing was like acceptable to cry about, then crying just like wasn't allowed, I guess. Not allowed, but just frowned upon. And I don't think I observed it in others or anything. I feel like I, in a sense, like came up with it on my own, just because if I wasn't allowed to cry, then then let me distract myself by doing other things. And like one thing that I would focus on that like as I grew up, obviously I think I adapted more to it in college, is journaling. So like when discussed in the lecture of November 22nd, when Professor Hernandez was like discussing about the different ways of coping, I purely connected on the way of coping within journaling. I just feel like within my life there's a lot of circumstances where I just don't feel like communicating the situation with others, and my way of like expressing and like truly understanding a situation is by writing it down and reflecting. And so I feel like my way and like process of grieving is changed based on the situation. I don't feel like it is consistent. I do tend to also like find distractions, so that being like I said, journaling, running and reading. But I also tend to like find loops within the like a situation, like go like just spend money to forget about something, and like I wouldn't say like self-care, but I like would rather go shopping than think about something, if that makes any sense. um how does it compare to other examples that we've discussed or that I've read about? I would like to compare Jessica and David's response within their grieving processes. Like I feel like I can reflect more on David's response, that being like going out and like spending money, because I feel like money is like a distraction, or like just buying things, that's like a distraction, compared to Jessica's response, which was more of an emotional reflection. Like she tends to enjoy feeling her or understanding her feelings a lot more, which is a little bit more complicated for me to do since I was raised on a different aspect. And I think that that's important when reflecting back to the experiences of grief within the lecture of November 20th. Just like because when discussing the who, where, what, and why, it I like try to reflect back and understand myself a little bit more emotionally, because I realize my ways of like coping is being distractions and not really just fully understanding what I'm going through and experiencing. And so, that being said, when discussing my disenfranchised grief, I feel like I do go through that disenfranchised grief. And what makes my grief disenfranchised would be like I feel like I feel that more when losing connections or bonds with people in my life, that being friendships and relationships. That's like the key way that I feel like I experience that. And something that really like reflected upon that, like my disenfranchised grief, would be the passage of Grief and Mourning Gone Away by Sheer Catherine. I just feel like I feel like you don't have to grieve someone who's dead to grieve them, if you know what I mean. Like I feel like grieving friendships and relationships is pretty normal, and it's honestly not as discussed, which I feel like makes it disenfranchised. And how I express this disenfranchised grief is usually by mourning the subject, like just looking back and like trying to paint a better picture of the situation, or reasoning why me and said person aren't in connection or like communication anymore. And I think that that like it's a very up and down battle for me to face, and the way that it can be like more so just like change from disenfranchised to more traditionally. I think I do have to just cope more with my emotions and not try to distract myself and understand what I am feeling. And I feel like when reading about the man's search for meaning and the lecture of November 18th, that lecture truly did like touch a lot into like what I feel like I need to understand about myself, like understanding the bigger meaning of life, and how just because one thing is out of your life doesn't mean better things are coming. And that not only being said about like connections with people, but also like just life itself. Like there's more to life than just grieving over like a failed grade or like my car not working, or like, you know, life just isn't perfect. And I think that that passage really touched me. And also, when viewing the video, the TED Talk on why knowing more about grief can make it suck less, I feel like after reading that passage from the lecture and then that video, it really just did assist a lot more within the disenfranchised grief, which is the way that I think it can be transferred and like made easier to understand. And then overall, I just feel like grief is grief, and the more you know it, the better you can cope with it and deal with it. And when comparing Jessica and David's disenfranchised grief, I think that both of their responses and adding on to mine being about like losing people and moving on from that has a lot to deal with like today's social like aspect of understanding how we're humans at the end of the day, and losing people doesn't mean that they have to be dead, but just like the overall message of losing them is enough to understand and to really just accept the way of grief with the different types it comes in. So yeah, thank you.